So we've talked about the streaming stuff. The parks are obviously the only thing that was a part of this earnings call that was a big positive for the Walt Disney Company. Not much else. And then Bob Iger opens his mouth about Reedy Creek in the Central Florida Oversight or Tourism Oversight District, which is what it now is. Former Reedy Creek, which is now dead and gone. And oh boy, did he stick his foot in it, in his mouth, that is to say. And I'm still reeling from this, apart from the conflation of Disney equals Reedy Creek, going into this reiteration of this bogus First Amendment violation argument that is nonsense, because, again, the only way that Disney can argue that their First Amendment rights were violated is to say that they are Reedy Creek, and that Reedy Creek Improvement District, the former Reedy Creek Improvement District, was nothing more than another corporate subsidiary of the Walt Disney Company, which jeopardizes the Reedy Creek to begin with and then validates every single thing that the state of Florida did.
Well, it's one of the biggest legal faux pas you could make in terms of being the CEO of a company. You are legally bound to not be a government. We've went through this now many times at great length, talking about just how horrendous it is if the Walt Disney Company is, in fact, one and the same with what is now no longer in existence, the Reedy Creek Improvement District. It would signal that the company was complicit in decades of deceiving the state of Florida, because Walt Disney himself was the pitch man who got the Florida legislature to sign on to establishing two cities which would run their own special district. That was under the auspices that the Walt Disney Company was going to be running the Walt Disney World Resort, and that within that resort would be actual real cities with real citizens. And therefore, those municipalities would then receive all the powers granted unto normal cities. Now, we know that Disney, for decades, has confined those two cities to only being two cul-de-sacs, one cul-de-sac per city with a couple of double wides around them. And they did that so that they would control anybody and everybody who lived, a handful of people, in their property. And then they could control the power of government without actually having to govern. In other words, they would be granted all the powers of taxation, policing, fire, infrastructure, bonds, everything, even to the point that they could build an airport or a nuclear power plant, yet they would have no citizens that they would have to fool with. Now, that's been an open secret. But if you are the CEO of the company and billions upon billions of dollars are at stake, declaring that you are one and the same as that district puts you into a place where your company is exposed to tremendous danger. And it says to me that perhaps Bob Iger is simply receiving terrible legal advice, or that, in fact, the company is being led by a man who has sniffed enough pixie dust that he believes the stuff he's saying, but it is not in accordance with the law. It is not in accordance with the SEC, in my humble opinion. And there is no reason in the world that your CEO should be very careful with small items that have, let's say, a couple $1 million at stake, and then blathers about stupidly about an issue that is political, divisive, and could cost you $1 trillion over the next century. That is the utmost stupid thing that I have heard from a CEO in an earnings report. And I don't know when. I don't know that and this is the second time he's done it, except this time he was more explicit. And this will be used, in my opinion, this will absolutely be used in legal proceedings.
Yeah, and that wasn't even the worst of what he said during this call, because he said something all new that y'all probably saw it, fell out of my chair. I'll get to that in just a minute. Lorena, I know you've got about 20 minutes before you have to roll, but I want to give you a chance here. Go ahead. Your thoughts on Iger's general comments about Reedy Creek and Disney basically being the same thing, and that's why they feel like they've have their First Amendment rights violated.
I think it also goes to the issue that Disney has been allowed to pretty much throw their weight around the state of Florida for decades. It's I won't say an open secret, but but it is Disney's power and influence. And Iger seems to make the mistake of thinking that Florida is like Anaheim, and it is not. Central Florida is a small portion of the entire state of Florida. The fisherman in Manatee County isn't thinking about Disney. As far as he's concerned, Disney is some super expensive theme park that he can't afford to take his family to go to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the sheer hubris that Disney has been able to, to do this. They've had, they lobby, of course, the Florida government, but it's switched. It's no longer majority Democrat led. Now it's mostly Republican led with a Republican governor. But what Iger doesn't seem to understand is that, again, Florida is not California. Florida doesn't take very kindly to Yankee carpetbaggers like Iger telling them what they should be doing. The state doesn't care about Central Florida for the most part. They really don't. But Iger seems to think that that's all, and talk about how many jobs that they're bringing to the state. Okay, how many of those jobs, we'll say right now, have been filled by foreign labor? I've seen a lot of that happen. How many of their cast members have to live in those weekly rate hotels because they're not paying their cast members enough? And with this, with the layoffs that are coming, I know I'm kind of doing a little side here. How many cast members are going to get their hours cut? So Iger makes it seem as if Disney is this great neighbor in the state of Florida. They are not. And he acts as if they're the only employer in the state of Florida. And I brought it up earlier in the call that while Disney may be the largest employer in Central Florida, they are not the largest employer in the state. That will belong to Publix.
I think they don't understand.
The fisherman in Manatee County has a lot more connection with Publix than he does Disney.
I don't think they understand how badly they are now despised by the general Florida population over their determination that they would tell Florida residents what could and could not be included in their small children's curriculum, i.e. bedroom issues that traditionally are the purview of parents to explain to their kids when they're so ready. I also don't think that they understand the power structures that are in Florida. I'm talking about places like Doctors Lake, Fruit Cove, West Palm, and all those other places where the elites of Florida live. They have not correctly assessed that those places have largely turned against Disney in droves. They have lost their ability to negotiate with the state of Florida because they have taken stances that the state of Florida, whether that is right or wrong, despise. And it's part of this culture war that we're in, where the values of California are so drastically different than the values of other places, but they are. And you can't come in to the state of Florida and declare yourself that you want to be a political entity. You want to take on something that is extremely close to the minds and hearts of parents at large, and then assume that you're not going to suffer blowback. But the idea that you would take this position when it has the potential to cost you $1 trillion over a century of lost, exceedingly unique privileges that no other company has ever enjoyed in the country, well, that's insane. And I think that's why we hear Robert Iger rambling about, bumbling through his speech, weak and miffed and muffled and frustrated, is because he's a man who has made a terrible play on the chessboard, and he knows he's going to be made here. He just doesn't want to slow it down.
No, I don't think a lot of the analysts out there, especially the ones on the call and whatnot, I don't know if they quite understand the ramifications of this whole issue in Florida. I think a lot of them are, let's be honest, they're kind of dumb when it comes to this stuff.
Renegade.